Charles was born and raised in a very wealthy family and was an only child. His parents owned their own metal construction factory. His father was a strong-willed and demanding man, raised his son in strictness. Mason himself was born in a remote village. The family was very large, 8 children. They lived poorly, although that they kept their own household. He was the eldest child and was responsible for the younger ones. From childhood, he was accustomed to physical labor and was not afraid of any work. This greatly sharpened his character. After finishing school, he went to the city without anyone's help, got 1 secondary vocational and 2 higher education. He worked hard and founded his own production from scratch. The factory was unprofitable at first, then switched to self-sufficiency, and only after a few years began to bring a good profit. With Charles' mother, they met at the institute. Mason was finishing the 5th year when Emily studied only on the 1st. The relationship between them developed very rapidly. 6 months later, they quietly signed without a ceremony due to lack of money. The wedding was celebrated later, a few years later, when the funds appeared. Then they decided that it was time to have a child. But because of their difficult childhood, Mason did not want more than 2 children. Emily, on the contrary, wanted 2, or even 3. But after Charles was born, she had serious complications and could not get pregnant again. Charles was very difficult for Emily. Pregnancy went with constant problems. She was not sure to the last that she would be able to bear this child. Therefore, when the son was born, the mother did not want him. Parents spared nothing for their only child. The best education, expensive clothes, healthy food according to their income level. But at the same time, the father did not allow the mother to spoil and indulge the whims of the boy. Mason participated as much as possible in the upbringing of his son, as time allowed him. He spent holidays and weekends with his family, was faithful to his wife and son all his life. Charles had never met a more decent man in his life. He wanted to be like his father. Emily was born and raised in an intelligent family. Her father was a hereditary doctor, and her mother was a famous poetess. The girl was an only child, and, unlike Mason, she was greatly spoiled. Always tried to please in everything. When Emily and Mason signed, her parents offered help, but he refused. He wanted to achieve everything on his own and, of course, achieved. Charles and Camille met at a veterinary clinic. Camille was interning there from the Agricultural Institute and was employed on a half-time basis. She was finishing her veterinary degree. Charles came there with his cat. Camille independently diagnosed the problem and prescribed the treatment. She was highly praised by the doctors. She was quite an able student and loved animals madly. In this, they were similar to Charles. He dreamed of having a cat all his life, but his mother was categorically against it, covering herself with non-existent allergies. And only after graduation, and when he was able to live alone, he got the desired animal. The cat was kind, pedigree, insanely beautiful, but with urolithiasis. With this problem, Charles went to the veterinary clinic several times. Charles worked at his father's company, but remotely in the office was quite rare, no more than once a month. In addition, he served a couple of other firms of individual entrepreneurs from his circle of good acquaintances. Charles received a good education abroad, but returned to Russia to live. He turned out to be an excellent programmer. None of his employers had any complaints about him, except for his basic education. He constantly took advanced training courses to keep abreast of all changes in the field. Charles was an honest and decent person. His mother always wanted her son to find a girl, a future wife from an intelligent, educated, and equally well-off family. But for a young man's social status and material position of people did not matter. Camille was born and grew up in a small village, more like a hamlet. Her parents were simple laborers, had a small household. They lived very modestly. Raised 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son. Camille Valera. Terroir was the eldest daughter. After graduating from high school, she went to the city and enrolled in an institute, planning to return to her native village and work as a veterinarian after graduation. Her parents discouraged her. They wanted a better life for their daughter. And Camille promised that if she found a decent job, she would stay. If she couldn't find a place in the city, she'd come home. Beautiful, hardworking, very modest, not spoiled by life girl, felt like a stranger in the big city. She studied well and did an excellent job at the veterinary clinic. She was offered to stay there after graduation, but she was hesitant. The thought of going back to her parents' house still lingered in her mind. On the day of the meeting, Camille was in a hurry to get home. Charles and his cat were the last clients of the clinic. After the appointment was over, she hurriedly packed up and quickly headed for the exit.
They ran into Charles at the door of the clinic. Then he caught up with her, running along the road toward the bus stop. "Dr. Camille!" He called out to the girl from the window of the car. Camille turned her head, looked at Charles, and ran even faster.
"What's your hurry? Let me give you a ride," Charles insisted. "No need. I'm almost to the stop," Camille replied, panting. "I'd say you've run, but it would be faster by car. Believe me, no thanks. You won't wait for a bus
At this time, they rarely run. You don't have to run. What do you want? Are you following me? Why are you following me? Camille, it's me, your last patient for today. Well, my Marussia, to be exact. We saw you 10 minutes ago. Yes, I recognized you. Let me let you down. As a thank you for your prompt diagnosis, you're obviously in a hurry. Okay, you got it. You can drive me home. I'm really in a hurry. Camille got into Charles's car. She had to submit her thesis paper for review before the end of the day. But before that, there was still some writing to be done. She had little time left for her diploma because of her studies and work. She had to write it in bits and pieces, during breaks, and at night. Charles stopped at the entrance. Camille thanked him and ran into the driveway at the same brisk pace. The next day, Charles came to the clinic again. His cat's tests were ready. Camille was at her desk. She described his animal's condition in detail, confirmed the treatment, and left the phone number of the clinic and the attending doctor. Charles insisted that she leave her number, but Camille refused. It was the end of the workday, and he decided to wait for Camille outside the clinic. When she got out, Charles got out of his car and approached the girl. "I don't want to scare you with mine intrusiveness. I'm just offering you a ride home, especially since I know where you're going. And on the way, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few more questions about my Marusia's treatment. It's important to you, too, that she gets well soon." Charles smiled. "How persistent are you?" "Only for the sake of your cat. You're lucky. I'm in a hurry today, too." "True, not like yesterday," Camille smiled back. They talked about distracted topics the whole way. Having only mentioned the cat's treatment a couple of times, Camille immediately took a liking to Charles. A modest, intelligent, very attractive girl. He was a good-looking man himself, tall, well-built. A polite and self-confident young man. Charles managed to get Irina's phone number. For questions at the window, of course. Nothing personal, he assured her. But both of them realized that at least the sympathy was mutual. And they were interested in being together. They sat in the car outside the driveway. Camille had to study for her diploma. She didn't have much free time. Charles was also studying. At the same time, he was upgrading his qualifications. He had lectures all day. Besides his main job, he had no time for his personal life, so he didn't ask Camille to meet him, but only called her before going to bed, explaining his workload. 2 weeks later, when he was finally finished, Camille started her state exams. Now she had no time for meetings. Without lifting her head, she sat over the tickets and repeated the material. It was a very difficult time of graduation. The exams and the thesis. Camille was very worried. She was used to being the best. The excellent girl syndrome did not let her relax.
Charles knew when and what exams Camille had. He tried to drive to the institute and support her. All their communication was limited to the time spent in the car, while he drove her home. By the middle of the summer, Camille finally received her red diploma.
Charles insisted on celebrating this important event and invited Camille to a restaurant. She was so happy that day that she accepted his offer immediately, despite her fatigue. The evening went beautifully. Exquisite dishes, excellent service, cozy, romantic atmosphere. Everything was perfect for spending time together. They discussed different topics, laughed, and enjoyed the moment. After dinner, Camille and Charles decided to take a walk around the city, enjoying the coolness of the summer evening. They didn't want to part, but Camille had a strict upbringing. She had never been in a relationship with a man before. So, after the walk, Charles took her home. She lived in a small rented apartment, paid for by herself. It was an old 5-story building in a not very prosperous part of town, with 20-year-old renovations, shabby walls, and creaky floors. But Camille was satisfied with everything. Besides, she did not have the financial means for more decent housing. Her parents were expecting Camille after graduation for at least a week. She went to see them, told them about her work, that she was appreciated and respected as a young doctor. Her parents were happy that their daughter had settled in the city where there were more opportunities for growth and life than in their village. Upon her return, she went straight back to work on study leave. Finished. The diploma was obtained and Camille could start working as an independent veterinary doctor. She loved this job very much. Every animal was special to her. She showed care and attention to each pet and did her best to heal them or relieve their suffering. Their relationship with Charles became increasingly close and warm. They spent all their free time together and were comfortable with each other. After 3 months, Charles decided to confess to Camille that he loved her. The feeling was mutual. Camille moved into Charles's apartment. He wanted it very much, but the girl could not make up her mind for a long time. It was much more comfortable to live at his place. It was a huge duplex apartment in the center of the city. In the upper room, they slept and spent their free time. And in the lower room, Charles had an office. In addition, there was a kitchen living room, where they met with friends. Camille tried to cook home-cooked meals, which Charles had gotten used to while living alone. There was a cook at his parents' house who was a very good cook. Sometimes he would go there to eat something tasty and healthy. The rest of the time, he ate in restaurants or ordered food home. Once a week, his housekeeper came to him and cleaned his apartment, ironed his pants and shirts. Camille took over all these duties. She wasn't used to having someone help her. Living in the countryside had accustomed her to physical labor. Charles was eager for Camille to meet his parents. He decided that the time had come and told her mother that they were coming to visit them for the weekend. Camille was very worried. She knew that Charles's parents were not simple people, that they were very wealthy and famous in their circles. What if they didn't like that their son had chosen a simple country girl? Her fears were not in vain. On the weekend, the young people came to visit their parents. Charles bought a bouquet of flowers for his mother because they had not seen each other for a long time. He wanted to do her a favor. Their father met them outside when Charles drove onto his property. It wasn't just a house, it was a whole estate, with a huge area. Camille had only seen this in movies before. Her parents were very rich. Mom consoled her ego by living in such a big house. She was the one who always wanted such a luxurious palace. Most of the rooms were not used in any way. They stood, fully furnished, but no one had ever lived there. This family of two had an army of staff housekeepers, cooks, drivers, security guards, a gardener. The father was a very powerful man in the construction industry. The mother was also prominent. She owned a chain of dental clinics. The table was set in a large reception room. Everything in this room was tastefully furnished and very expensive. Charles missed the food that the chefs prepared. He had grown up with them since childhood and loved them very much. He introduced his girlfriend to his parents. His mom immediately started asking questions about his parents' life, about his job. She did not like it terribly that Camille turned out to be a poor country girl. She thought that such people were very mercantile and did not deserve her son's attention. But she didn't show it. Her father, on the contrary, when he learned that Camille was from the village, began to ask her where she came from and how they lived in the villages nowadays. He was interested in the subject. After talking to Camille, each of the parents drew conclusions for themselves. The father liked the girl because she, like him, had grown up in the village. The mother did not like her for the same reason. In the evening, when the young people went home, Emily spoke very harshly to her husband about the chosen one of their son. Parents almost quarreled on this ground. Mason was offended by his wife's statement, drawing a parallel with himself. Their opinions were very different. But the son did not need to know about the true attitude of his mother to his girlfriend. Charles and Camille were happy together, and that was the main thing. A month later, they went to the village to visit Camille's parents. They were greeted with a less sumptuous table, but with warmth and hospitality. They saw the sincerity of the relationship and were happy to see their daughter so happy. Camille had a little secret that had plagued her ever since she had met Charles. At first, it didn't matter, and then Camille was afraid to tell it.
But at some point, it had to be told, and when she got home, Camille decided to do it. Charles, darling, I have something to tell you. Camille, what's wrong? You know, I was really afraid to tell you. Your family is very different from mine. I didn't know how you felt about it. What's wrong? Do you have a nice family? I like them a lot. What is it you want to tell me? Listen to me, okay? Without interrupting, just please. The thing is, I have a brother named James, but he's in jail right now. He's in jail for fighting, self-defense. He was coming home from work and saw a girl he didn't know screaming for help. Her boyfriend dragged her forcibly into the car, used physical force. She lashed out very hard, but no one was around. No one helped her. James approached her and asked the guy to leave the girl alone. But the guy was drunk and a fight broke out between them. The guy fell and hit his head. He suffered a serious brain injury. James was convicted and sent to prison. The girl was present at the trial. She thanked my brother in front of everyone for helping her, for saving her, but this was disregarded and James was given 3 years. I was afraid it would bring my family's honor down in your eyes. And I didn't know how to tell you. He defended the weak, and now he's being punished for it. On the contrary, you should be proud of your brother. He did the manly thing. Any normal man would have done that. I'm proud, but ashamed at the same time. People don't care what he was convicted of. People care that he's in jail. But James is a very good man. He's kind, and he'll always come to the rescue. You have nothing to be ashamed of, and you don't have to tell people. It's only your business, your family. It shouldn't concern the rest of us. How long does he have to serve? 2 years. But now you know everything about me. Don't worry, I haven't changed my mind about you or your family. You can ask for anything you want, of course. Let's not tell your parents, please. Your mom doesn't like me very much as it is, and this could make her opinion of me even worse. Okay, sighs. No one will know about this.
And don't worry. Charles hugged Camille and comforted her. They lived in peace and harmony for almost a year. When Charles decided to propose to Camille, he bought a huge amount of flowers and a beautiful diamond ring, flowers and arranged vases all over the apartment, creating a special romantic atmosphere. He put the champagne to chill and prepared a light appetizer. Camille returned from work on time. Charles usually dropped her off and picked her up, but on this day he said he had very important things to do, and Camille was coming back on her own. When she walked in, she immediately realized that this was all for a reason. "How beautiful! I have never seen so many roses!" the girl marveled. "Darling, you will be my wife." Charles got down on one knee like a knight in the movies and handed Camille a box with a ring. "Yes, I agree." Charles took Camille in his arms and began to twirl her around the apartment. They were so happy at that moment. The next day, they went to the registry office and filed the application. The parents had to be informed in person. The others decided to send out an invitation and duplicate it with a phone call. For the weekend, they planned trips first to the village to Camille's parents, and then to Charles's parents. Camille's father and mother were very happy for the young couple. They saw their daughter's fiancé as a good and decent man, and thought that they were putting their daughter in good hands. Charles' parents also took the news well, despite the mother's attitude toward her daughter-in-law. Emily, though, disliked the future daughter-in-law, but respected her son's choice. Charles wanted a modest wedding with a small number of guests, but his mother strongly insisted on a lavish celebration, arguing that her only son was getting married, and perhaps once for life. Therefore, she would not allow modesty. Let everything be beautiful and rich. After all, they can afford it. Charles did not argue with his mother. It was really important for her to have an unforgettable celebration. Charles's mother started preparing for the wedding just the next day. Emily left Camille several addresses where it is possible to celebrate such an important event beautifully. The task of the young was to go around these places and decide which one she liked best. The future mother-in-law was just burning with the idea of shaking the city with her son's wedding. She interfered in the preparation process, but she did it quite delicately so as not to spoil the relationship with her daughter-in-law before time. But on the other hand, it allowed her and Camille to bond because all her ideas were planted not on her son, but on his fiancé. It was very wise of her to make friends, to build a relationship with the future wife of her only son. Preparations for the wedding were in full swing. The invitations were created by a designer and printed at the printing house. They were exclusive postcards. The signing was sure to be in the fresh air, in an open area. For this purpose, the restaurant should have its own large territory. Among such, and chose the young ones, according to the list that Charles's mother sent them. The choice of treats on the table was also not without her participation. Camille didn't mind it all, but Charles didn't like it. But he saw his mother's efforts and could not refuse her. Everything was on the highest level. The restaurant was outside the city. It was not just a restaurant, but a whole country complex in the style of a real nobleman's nest. Luxurious interior, beautiful well-groomed territory with a lake, a huge choice of dishes, separate beautiful places for photo shoots, and the opportunity to hold a marriage ceremony on a special glade with perfectly green grass. Everything was Emily's dream, and she didn't care about the cost of all this splendor. But it didn't matter much to the young people. From the very beginning, they realized that this wedding was more for their heir parents than for themselves. Charles and Camille were simply happy together. It was a colorful, very lavish celebration. Hundreds of guests, the richest, most famous people in town. The tables were bursting with exquisite treats, chic decorations and flowers, professional team of photographers, and video counts very beautiful. Huge-size wedding cake and fireworks. All this made the wedding truly luxurious and unforgettable. The next day, the young people were waiting for the flight. They spent a wonderful 2 weeks in the Arab Emirates. Camille had never been to warm countries, and in general abroad, she had never seen such a rich and beautiful city as Dubai. Fantastic skyscrapers, dancing fountains, huge water parks, comfortable beaches, the world's largest oceanarium, modern infrastructure, amazing beauty of the Persian Gulf, soft white sand, bright hot sun. Of course, for her, it was an amazing fairy tale vacation among other people, foreign traditions. When they arrived home, Charles's parents asked the young ones to choose a time and come to visit them. Mom was very excited about one subject: she wanted grandchildren. Charles had never been so attracted to any girl before. He had never had a serious relationship, and his parents were worried that they would be left without grandchildren. Now that their son had started a family, they asked him not to delay having children for us, but that we could at least have some for ourselves. Charles joked, "I didn't give birth to you right away either. Dad and I had to get on our feet first. But you have everything. You, your wife, have no reason to procrastinate. Haven't you lived enough for yourself yet? Mom, don't worry, we won't wait till we're 40, but we won't rush into it. We'll take it as it comes." That's good. But that's not all. Daddy and I have a proposition for you. Now that we're talking about grandchildren, they're gonna need space. Space! You're not gonna bring your kid into that awful apartment downtown. What's wrong with the apartment? It's pretty spacious. It's in a nice neighborhood. There's absolutely nothing to breathe. And the noise, it doesn't stop day or night. Where do you want us to move to? There's a house for sale on the next street over. It's smaller than ours, of course, but it'll be fine for a while. It's unfinished. Rumor has it the owners went bankrupt, and now that they want to sell it. It's worth a lot of money, but I don't think it'll be on the market for long. There will be buyers. Why don't you go down there and take a look at it? Mom, it's a long way from town. How would Camille get to work from here? It'd take me too long to drive her and bring her back. And I'm afraid the cabs will be late in the mornings, stuck in traffic. Camille should have learned to drive herself a long time ago. Oh, I'm too scared to drive. My father tried to teach me, and my brother too, but it didn't work out. You have a brother? You never told me before why he wasn't at the wedding. He lives far away from here. He couldn't make it. Camille realized she had said too much and was very embarrassed. James had 1 year left. Camille wrote him letters and periodically sent him parcels. There had always been a very warm relationship between them. He was younger by only a year and a half and had been protective of his sisters since he was a teenager and felt himself to be the eldest among them. His father raised him to be a very decent man, always ready to help. This decency is what ruined him. From childhood, he did a lot of physical work in the household, helped his father, and grew strong and hardy. He was the pride of his parents, the only son. He did not have time to finish technical school before he got into this unpleasant story. The relationship between Camille and Emily was quite friendly. Mother-in-law had to put up with the fact that her daughter-in-law is a simple country girl. But she did not try to hurt her, but rather taught her how to behave properly in society, what instruments to use in a restaurant, and what stores to visit so as not to look cheap around her son. Camille was also very tolerant of her mother-in-law interfering in their life with Charles. Out of respect and because of her upbringing, they went to see the plot. Everything was fine, but neither Charles nor Camille wanted to live so close to their parents. They refused this generous offer, arguing that such remoteness from the city would create a lot of inconveniences and make life very difficult. But they promised their parents that when Camille became pregnant, they would definitely look for a more spacious apartment in the city. The mother didn't like it. It was the biggest folly to be looking for a new place to live while pregnant. It will be necessary to think about other things about the child.
her sakasawatka child, and not about the apartment. It's a matter of deciding beforehand. Daddy and I are always here for you. Yes, Mommy, we know, don't worry about it. Okay, please, we adults can handle it. Then start looking right now. They'll believe it. It's a quick job. Okay, I promise. Don't take too long on this one either. Either. Charles and Camille. Charlie and Emile were very happily married, always supporting each other, enjoying every day they spent together. All important decisions were made together and always took into account the opinions and feelings of their partner. But neither Camille nor Charles were ready to have children. They were more than satisfied with their apartment. They lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and talked just about all sorts of silly things. Tell me, Charles, what did you dream about as a child? Oh, my whole childhood dream was to have a cat or a dog. All my friends had pets at home. We didn't. But my mom said she was terribly allergic to fur, so we couldn't get any. I grew up and started living on my own and got my Marusha. And one day I overheard my parents talking. My dad was on my side and tried to talk my mom into letting me have someone, but my mom said there would be no animals in our house, and that she made up that allergy story. And after that, I stopped asking. That's a sad story. You didn't resent your mom. At first, but she didn't know about it. Then I decided if a man doesn't like animals, he shouldn't be forced to bring them into the house. It wouldn't do any good. Yeah, I guess you're right. What were your dreams when you were a kid? Well, as a princess, I dreamed of a prince on a white horse. But that's standard girl stuff. It's nothing new. Becoming older, my girlfriends and I dreamed that a motorcade of limousines would drive up to our house, and all the neighbors would look out to see, say, what limousines in our village. So childish nonsense. Camille laughed. They laughed for a long time, remembering their childhood dreams. But Charles remembered the limousines well. 6 months passed. Camille finished even a driving school and got her license. Even though that they were not going to leave town, Charles bought her a car. Driving around the city was very difficult for Camille. She was literally shaking when she got behind the wheel. For the first 2 months, she drove only with her husband sitting next to her. She was afraid to drive out, but over time she became more relaxed, learned the right routes, and slowly mastered the city. James got out of prison and returned to the village to his parents. After being like that for a while, he decided that he wanted to move to the city, to find a job, to somehow organize his life in the village. Not everyone realized that he was not just a former prisoner, but a man who had suffered for his decency and kindness. Condemnation, discussion of him and their whole family was unbearable, and the family supported his decision. He found work in the city. Camille helped him find a rented apartment. She missed her brother very much, and sometimes they met. A big mistake was that she did not tell Charles. One day, Camille forgot to take her birth control pills. She told Charles, and he suggested that they quit taking them altogether. They still weren't ready, but decided that you can't prepare for something like this, and let it happen as it happens. However, the pregnancy did not occur. Her several months passed after the contraception was removed. Camille was waiting for a pregnancy to occur. At first, she did not want it very much, but over time, the desire matured. Finally, the test showed the cherished 2 stripes. She could not believe her eyes and took 2 more tests to be sure. Look what I have here. Camille showed the test to Charles. It's a pregnancy test. What do those 2 stripes mean, really? Are you really pregnant? I can't believe we're going to be parents soon. Charles was excited. You're about to be a daddy and a mommy. Well, actually, not that soon. In about 8 months. That time will fly by fast, believe me. Yeah, you must be really excited about this news. But, of course,
we haven't changed apartments. That's okay. It's very nice and cozy. I like everything about it. The baby will sleep in the same room with us for the first time anyway. 2 weeks later, Camille registered at the antenatal clinic. A month later, they decided to break the news to their parents. Camille called the village and told them everything over the phone. The parents had to go to their husband's parents. What wonderful news! How happy I am! Mom could not contain her emotions. We, as promised, did not wait until 40 years, laughed Charles. Do you know if it's a boy or a girl? No. First screening is in 2 weeks. But even then, it's unlikely the sex of the baby will be visible, answered Camille. Okay, wait a second. You're on the registry. How many weeks are you? Yes, of course I did. I'm 10 weeks, which is a little over 2 months. It's a little early to be asking about the sex of the baby. Where did you register? The local clinic near your house? No, that's not going to work. No local clinic. Why didn't I think of that before? I'll make an appointment with my gynecologist so you can see her. She's a very experienced doctor. There's very few of them left. Okay. How did Camille also see her mother-in-law's gynecologist? It was a very expensive private clinic. There was no doubt that highly qualified specialists worked there. In addition, special attention was paid to the comfort of the patients. Camille, of course, was not used to such an attitude and felt out of place. But her mother-in-law insisted that now all the treatment of her daughter-in-law must undergo in this clinic. One of the doctors there was Emily's best friend, but she did not inform Camille about it. The young set up for the birth of the child and waited for his appearance in the world. Camille began to look at baby clothes, bedding, strollers. She loved the feeling that a new life was born inside her, but this baby was not to be born. It was a perfectly ordinary day, no different from any other day. Camille got ready for work in the morning. She got behind the wheel of her car and drove off. She drove very carefully and followed all the driving rules. While crossing a large intersection on a green light, she saw with her side vision that a car was coming at her from the side and did not slow down. Camille turned sharply in that direction. And before she could even think about it, she was hit hard on her door. Her car was thrown to the side, and there she was hit by traffic. Another blow from the other side spun the car around, and she received a third blow again to her door. Traffic in 2 lanes came to a halt. The offending driver was badly injured from the impact. He had no airbag. By the time the ambulance arrived, he had died on the spot from his injuries. Forensics later determined that he was very drunk. 2 other cars were decently damaged. One of the drivers needed medical attention. Camille remained trapped in her car. She could not be treated until the emergency services arrived. Rescuers cut out the doors and part of the roof to extract her. The woman was unconscious but alive.
Shimiel Ambermi was taken to the hospital and underwent 2 emergency surgeries,
one of which was to terminate the pregnancy. The baby was dead. Charles reported when the surgeries had already been performed, he rushed to the hospital, warding off the terrible thoughts. He was not allowed into the ICU right after the surgery, but the doctor came out to talk to him. Camille was in a serious but stable condition. The internal bleeding was stopped as soon as possible. The gallbladder had to be removed. The reproductive organs were left in place. But after the surgery, she won't be able to get pregnant anytime soon. Her recovery will be long and difficult. When Camille came to, Charles was already there. He was allowed to come in the next day. He was on duty in the room, barely sleeping, so as not to miss her awakening.
Camille didn't immediately realize where she was and struggled to remember the last few minutes before the accident, when she realized what had happened to her. The first thing she asked about was the baby. It was very hard for Charles to say that their son had died and it turned out to be a boy. You and I are still so young. You'll get better soon, and we'll have a baby. I don't want another baby. My poor baby. He wasn't even born yet. Don't cry, please. It breaks my heart to look at you. Charles had tears in his eyes, but he held on. What about that man? Will he be punished? He killed my child. He's already been punished. He died on the spot. Camille sobbed the entire time she was conscious for days on end. Every now and then, she would fall asleep from the sedative injections. But when she woke up, she would start crying again. For her, the accident had been a huge stressor, and the death of her baby, an unbearable pain. After Emily was discharged, she found a good psychologist for Camille. 6 months of therapy did her good, although she tried to give up. Camille had always thought that all this psychology and its psychologists were just entertainment for rich people suffering from idleness. She would certainly never need those services. But when she felt relief after therapy, she admitted that the psychologist helped her a lot. It was also very supportive to go back to work. She enjoyed socializing with animals, thus the fact that she could help sick pets, cure them, save them from pain. Charles suggested that the Tharshare take a vacation and go on a retreat. They both needed it. A change of scenery is good for the emotional state. And it was important for Camille not to fall into depression again. They tried to talk out loud about what had happened to her, what had happened to the baby. And in time, Camille was able to talk about it without sobbing, just with tears in her eyes. But for full acceptance, it was necessary and was part of therapy, or else recreation. Camille also tried to refuse. She still felt guilty about continuing this life and being able to enjoy and rejoice after all that had happened. But Charles talked her into it, and they flew to the islands. The young flew to what seemed to be Cuba's most popular beach resort. There, they had a wonderful vacation on the shore of the Caribbean Sea, surrounded by snow-white sand and tropical vegetation. The vacation was unforgettable. Camille received a lot of incredible impressions, and upon returning home, practically returned to her former life. Time passed. According to the doctors, Camille had no female problems. She had fully retained her fertility and recovered from the surgery. But she could not get pregnant again. She and Charles underwent many different examinations in the best clinics. All the indicators were within normal limits. Her parents were seriously worried that they might be left without grandchildren and suggested that they consider in vitro fertilization. Doctors assured that 2 years is not a term, and the diagnosis of infertility to them, no one has not yet put a diagnosis of infertility. But her mother-in-law insisted. After waiting for another 6 months, Camille decided that yes, it was really time. Apparently, it was not fated to get pregnant on their own. But while they were undergoing additional examinations and preparing for IVF, Camille became pregnant. At the next ultrasound, the doctor saw a dense egg and told this news to the future parents. Later, it turned out that the pregnancy was not simple, multi-layered, Mona Z preferential. Camille's pregnancy was not easy. From the first week, she felt toxicosis and wild mood swings. Increased fatigue prevented her from working at full capacity. By the middle of the day, Camille was already exhausted. Besides, she was always hungry. This caused her to put on extra pounds. Camille was diagnosed with remote diabetes and was prescribed a special diet and medication. She felt her baby moving quite early, and this allowed her to take her mind off all her health problems. Now she felt and understood what she was suffering for. Near the middle of her pregnancy, she had to be hospitalized in a clinic. From time to time, Camille was allowed to go home, but she needed to be monitored at all times. She was terribly tired of the hospital, the constant nausea, and really wanted to go home. When she was 8 months pregnant, she was discharged, but on the condition that she would come to the hospital at the first contraction. They hadn't seen her brother in a while and arranged to meet at the mall. They sat on the platforms, the food court, and chatted for almost Oro 2. Camille complained about how hard her pregnancy was going. James told how he was living, what he had new things going on. Then, after saying goodbye, they went home. But they were seen by Camille's mother-in-law on the way out of the store. They hugged for a long time. It was obvious that they had a close relationship. The mother-in-law had doubts about Camille's fidelity to her husband. For one thing, she had been unable to get her husband and her son pregnant for a long time, and now suddenly, just before Echo got pregnant, there may not even be a husband. Secondly, there had never been twins in their lineage. All of this kept her on edge, and she decided as soon as Camille gave birth, a DNA test should be done. At night, when Charles was already asleep, Camille felt that it was time to go into labor. The contractions were still infrequent, not as painful. When she woke her husband, "Charles, Charles, please wake up." Camille tried to wake her husband. "What's wrong?" Charles didn't realize through his sleep what was going on. "I think I'm going into labor." "Come on, get ready, let's go to the clinic." Charles quickly jumped out of bed, started the car, and ran around the apartment as if he wanted to find something. He was so worried about the news that he didn't know what to do. Camille calmly got dressed and called the doctor, informing him that she was coming to deliver the baby. Her water broke on the way out of the apartment, and her contractions became more intense and painful. Camille changed her clothes, and they drove to the hospital. They were already waiting for her. Camille was changed and hooked up to the machines to see the baby's condition. The heartbeat was good. The approximation was head-to-head. Both fetuses were given splints, and the doctor decided that Camille could deliver on her own. Aro 6. Camille tried to deliver on her own, but labor was weak. There was not enough opening. It was impossible to wait any further. This is a huge risk for the babies and the mother. Camille was being prepared for a surgical delivery. Charles was waiting in the hallway the whole time. The doctor came out to him and informed him that a C-section was planned. In the labor room near Camille gathered a whole team of doctors, obstetrician-gynecologist, anesthesiologist, resuscitator, doctor. Nor was she prepared to not on covert equipment and resuscitation systems for the twins. Camille opted for general anesthesia, even though the Boscher fear sore, rower katrawer sirs. Suggested distress. Real anesthesia to see, to hear, to participate in the process, being conscious, she did not want for fear. And the operation went well. The babies were washed, weighed, memorized, and the young father was allowed to look at them. The babies were born rich men, quite large for a multi-layered pregnancy. Charles was overjoyed. Camille was still under anesthesia and did not see how happy her husband was now. When she regained consciousness, she was also shown the children and allowed to sleep. It was morning, and Charles called first his parents to tell them about the birth of the children, and then Camille's parents. Emily immediately dialed her friend who worked at the clinic. Their goal was to draw blood from one of the babies and compare it to Charles's DNA. His samples were already available at the clinic. The young father needed to rest, so he went home. He planned to come back afterward and bring some things for mom and sons. Emily also expressed her desire to come to the clinic and visit her daughter-in-law. They arranged to meet at the entrance and went up to the room together. Camille was lying in a nice, expensive bed. The conditions for mom and babies in the single room were very comfortable. In addition, a nurse came in periodically, helped with the children, fulfilled Camille's requests. The husband and mother-in-law entered the room with bouquets of flowers. Charles hugged Camille and thanked her for her sons. The mother-in-law was only concerned about whose children they were. She began to look at them and tried to find a resemblance to her son. But the babies were not like any of their parents. One was much larger than the other. Both were rosy-cheeked, frequent with blue eyes. Emily tensed. After all, both Charles and Camille have brown eyes. In whom, then, were the children? She left the young parents and ran to her friend. The blood and the baby were taken and submitted for examination. The result should be ready the next day. The friend promised to let her know when it was ready. Emily was waiting for her son at the exit. She did not see the resemblance to the children and could not resist telling Charles about it. "Charles, son, are you sure these are your kids?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I became a happy father today. Why are you asking me that?" "Of course I'm sure. I'm not sure. And they're nothing like you. They were born a few hours ago." "Of course they don't look like me or Camille. You concluded they weren't my children because you couldn't see the resemblance. That's not the only reason." "I saw this one. Camille with a man? It took her a long time to get pregnant by you. And then, all of a sudden, miracle pregnancy? And we had 2 twins in the maternity ward. Never! Mom, I'm begging you. Stop talking nonsense. What are you accusing my wife of? Cheating. I'm not accusing her yet. I suspect it. We've taken a DNA test, and it'll be ready tomorrow. Then we'll see if the kids are yours or not. This is crazy. I can't believe what you're saying and doing right now. I'm sure they're my kids, and my wife has never cheated on me. We'll find out tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll find out for yourself. I don't need any tests." They didn't part very well. Charles's joy was dampened by his mother's unfounded suspicions. The next day, his mother-in-law went to get the test results, but Emily would not let her son find out the DNA tests of his country wife's twins.
Suspecting Camille of cheating, she decided to redo it as the result was unexpected to her. The probability of parentage was 99.99%. But after all, she was almost certain that the Cowdever children were not her sons. Charles did not ask the protest. He wasn't interested in it. Besides, if in fact it showed a lack of parentage, Mom would be sure to claim it. He was confident in Camille and in the fact that they were his children. 6 days passed and Camille was being prepared for discharge. Her mother-in-law was livid that her son was not interested in the results, and out of spite said that the test showed that he was not the father. Charles asked to see the paper, but the mother refused, accusing her son of distrusting the closest person. Oh, she hoped that this way he would at least think about it and ask what kind of man was next to Camille. But the son didn't ask any questions and limited communication with his mother altogether. Emily sat in her car and waited whether or not her son would come to pick up his wife after her words. But when a motorcade of expensive limousines pulled up to the maternity hospital, and Charles and 2 of his friends got out, it became clear that he believed his wife completely. The young father called his wife and asked her to look out the window. Camille went to the window and saw 3 snow-white cars, the kind she had dreamed of as a child. Charles was standing there with a huge bouquet of roses, and his friends were holding flowers too. Naive fool! She'll show you her true colors, Emily thought, looking at the whole scene. Charles brought Camille and his sons home. There were 2 cribs waiting for the babies, populated with beautiful new linens. But the babies refused to go to their cribs, crying and gobbling all the time. Camille put them down with them. Charles had to go downstairs and lay on the couch. The first 2 months were a real challenge for the young parents. Camille was already exhausted enough with the priceless nights. Charles could not function properly due to the constant screaming of the children. They were either sleeping at the same time or yelling at the same time. One would start. The other would pick up. That's what twins are for, to feel each other out. Charles regretted that he and Camille had turned down his parents' offer of a new place to live. Another room with a blank door would be nice now. He suggested that Camille look into the matter. But the wife had no time for that.
She was coping with 2 infants on her own. There was not much help from her husband. He was always working at home or in the office where it was quieter. Camille barely found time to take a shower once a day and eat the meals she had no time to cook. The only time the babies slept well was outside. And most of the day, Camille tried to walk with the children. At night, they woke up every oro 2 hubaks. Camille didn't have time to rest. She lost a lot of weight, bags under her eyes. She looked very bad. Always tired and sad, her husband was not attracted to her as before. Charles wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. One day he suggested hiring a nanny to help with the children. Test the children. But Camille did not want to see a stranger near her children. The Charles parents were preparing to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary. Emily planned a grand banquet to celebrate the anniversary, invited friends and relatives, rented a large restaurant, personally supervised the process of decorating the hall. Camille could not go. She had no one to leave the twins with. Charles also did not want to go without his wife, but his mother promised to be very offended if he did not come. Camille let her husband go alone without any questions. She understood how important it was to his parents. Charles stayed for a short time, congratulated his parents, and left the restaurant. After the anniversary, the parents flew to Thailand for a vacation. The flight was long and arduous, but those 2 weeks were unforgettable. They enjoyed the beaches, excursions, and local cuisine. The territory of the hotel, where the parents settled, was very large and beautiful. All-inclusive, full service. Everything was perfect, but that they didn't know yet how this vacation would end. On the last day, just before the flight, Mason noticed a huge mosquito on his arm. Its bite was painful. The bite site was red and hurt badly. Well, mosquitoes? Mosquito! He thought and paid no attention. At home a few days later, Mason developed a fever. His head ached as if someone had driven over it. His parents thought this, ma'am? It was the result of acclimatization or a cold. Later, a rash appeared on his body, and only then did it come. They called the doctor. The diagnosis was no consolation. The doctor suspected encephalitis. Urgent hospitalization. Examination confirmed the terrible disease, but it was impossible to help. They turned to the doctors too late. It was a terrible tragedy for the family. At the funeral gathered a large number of people. Business partners, friends, relatives came to say goodbye to this decent and fair man. People respected him. They offered their condolences to Emily, but she didn't care about any of that anymore. She felt devastated. The loss of a loved one with whom she had spent the best years of her life. It had taken its toll on her health. She became very sad, refused to eat, hardly slept at all. A week later, her mother-in-law had a heart attack and was hospitalized. The best doctors attended to her health and quickly got her back on her feet. After discharge, she was sent to a sanatorium for rehabilitation. Now, Emily was terribly lonely alone in a huge house, but she wasn't going to sell it. There were too many good memories she had of the place. Charles persuaded Camille to move into her parents' house. There was plenty of room, a few spare rooms that had been sitting unused for years. The young people began to organize the nursery, glued wallpaper, completely changed the furniture and curtains. Camille practically lived in the room with the children. Charles now had to take over the management of his father's factory. He didn't know much about it, although his father planned to eventually involve his son and hand over the company to him. He began to spend a lot of his time in the office rather than at home. His mother-in-law and Camille were constantly together. Despite the DNA test, Emily continued to think that her daughter-in-law was cheating on her son. After the bereavement, the mother-in-law began to behave unbearably. She often picked on Camille. She did not like the way she behaved with her husband or cared for the children.
Camille tried to spend more time out of the house to avoid listening to her mother-in-law's reproaches. She couldn't answer her. Charles gave Camille his own car and took her father's car. After the accident, Camille did not immediately get behind the wheel and started driving again. It was very difficult for her, but now they lived far out of town, and it was extremely difficult without a personal car with 2 children. In time, she remembered her driving skills, moved into her fear, and got behind the wheel. A personal vehicle made her life easier. She could get around independent of anyone. She and James arranged to meet at the park. Camille drove there with the children, pulled a stroller out of the trunk, unfolded it, and sat the children down. They walked around and talked. There was always a trusting relationship between them. Camille told how hard it was for her to live in the same house with her mother-in-law. No one could sympathize like a sibling. Camille had no friends of her own in town. Her mother-in-law asked her driver to follow Camille around and take pictures of everyone she would meet. The driver took pictures of James holding the boys in his arms, each in turn, as he and Camille walked and hugged. He forwarded all of these to Emily. She was furious when she saw the pictures and was waiting for her sister-in-law to arrive to produce them. Camille returned in the evening. Her mother-in-law met her at the door. "Where do you go all day with little children?" She started from the doorstep. "We went for a walk to the park." "Walking with who?" "With the twins, of course." "What kind of question is that?" "Why are you asking?" "I want to know who you're seeing behind my son's back. Would you cheat on him?" What are you talking about?" "Yes, I did go out with my own brother today. Are you guys following me?" "How did you come up with the brother thing so fast? It's not the first time I've seen you with that person." "You shameless, walking redneck. My son brought you into our home and you dare to deceive him." "I never deceived your son. I love him, and he's the first and only man in my life." "You're lying, you shameless liar. I won't stand for it. I'm sorry. Get the hell out of here and go back to the country." Camille took the children into the room and began to gather her and the children's belongings. She carried everything to the car, took the boys, and left the house. Her mother-in-law continued to accuse her of cheating and yelled hurtful things at her in return. Camille went to the apartment where they lived before the move. All the way there, she cried with resentment. Charles, as usual, was very late at work. When he returned home, he did not find his spouse and children. He started to call her, but Camille dropped the phone in the car and did not notice it was gone. Therefore, she did not answer the phone. The mother was in her room. He went in to see where Camille and the boys had gone. "Mom, hi. Do you know where Camille and the kids are?" "I call her, she doesn't pick up." "Your wife is cheating on you. If you didn't know about it, you're a fool." "That's why she won't pick up. She was probably on her way to see her lover." "What are you talking about? Did you have a fight with her?" "There you go again. I saw her with the same man. They were hugging again. He held your children in his arms." "I need to talk to her myself. Why don't you tell me what happened here?" "Nothing happened. I don't want to see that woman. It's up to you to decide if you're willing to live with someone who betrays you." "I don't want to continue this conversation. You don't know what you're talking about. She's the mother of my children, and I'm your mother." "Okay, Mom. I'm sorry. I need to find Camille." Charles realized his wife had gone to the apartment and headed there. On the way, he called her, but the phone was not answered. Then it became unavailable, and Charles was worried that nothing had happened. Camille was already looking for her phone. She waited for the kids to put it in so she could go out to the car and check there. When she got downstairs, Charles was pulling up to the house.
He saw his spouse and helped with the headlights, and Camille headed towards the car. "Charles, please excuse me. You must have lost us. I wanted to call you, but I can't find my cell phone." "Camille, how did you scare me? What happened? Did you have a fight with Mom?" "Oh, I'm not coming back to this house. I'm sorry." "Let's go upstairs and you can tell me everything. We'll look for your cell phone first." Camille opened the car and found the phone. It rolled under the seat. They went up to the house. She told them that her mother-in-law had accused her of cheating because she had seen her with her brother. Truthfully, how and when she saw him, she didn't initiate. To the objection that it was not a lover and her own brother, she reacted violently and turned to insults. Charles, of course, believed his wife, all the more so when he saw that his mother had been out of sorts lately. If he had known that Camille was to meet her brother, he could have told her instead of listening to her unfounded accusations. The next day, he returned to the house and took the rest of Camille and the children's belongings. Emily, she did not want her son to stay with her spouse. It was hard for her to be alone, but she couldn't be around Camille anymore either. Her daughter-in-law irritated her on and off. No matter how much she tried to get used to her and treat her well, she still couldn't accept the family. Charles and Camille returned to the apartment altogether. Charles traveled to his mother's house once a week to visit her. As time went on, he began to notice that she was acting very strangely. It wasn't like her condition after her father's death. It was something else. She began to forget what they had talked about not so long ago, making a mess at home and not letting the housekeeper clean it up. She could walk around the house, unkempt, in dirty clothes. He realized that things were bad when his mother started talking about his father in the present tense, as if he were alive and about to come home from work. Charles gently suggested that she see a doctor, but Emily refused. The psychiatrist arrived at her house. Charles asked her not to tell the doctor that he was a psychiatrist, but to introduce himself as an acquaintance of her father's. It was necessary to show Mom to a specialist, but at the word psychiatrist, she began to freak out, not recognizing the problem and not wanting to discuss her condition. The doctor talked to her as if he were an old acquaintance of her late husband. But Emily said that her husband was alive. She could not name the date or day of the week and was confused between the present and the past. The psychiatrist suggested Alzheimer's disease and suggested that Mom be hospitalized for evaluation and a definitive diagnosis. Mom adamantly refused to go to the hospital. It was not easy to convince her. The diagnosis was confirmed. Charles was very upset. He began to remember that the signs of the disease had started to appear long ago, but no one had realized or paid attention. Emily was discharged and returned home. But she could not be left alone. Charles hired several caregivers so that 24 days to Miyari, someone would be there to look after her. The dental clinics that Emily owned were left unattended. The receptionist called and tried to resolve issues remotely, but there was no dialogue. Charles tried to solve the current problems, but he had no time at all. And my mother no longer remembered that it was her life's work. In order to keep afloat, one branch had to close temporarily in the second branch. All the problems and issues were solved by the administrator together with Charles. As the mother got worse, she gradually lost all her skills. The disease progressed. A doctor suggested putting the mother in a special institution. There, she would be guaranteed good care and medication. Charles did not want Mom to feel lonely, not at home, and refused. Until she started behaving aggressively towards, caregiver Charles changed them one by one. Mom would kick them out of the house, and then she couldn't remember it. And then there was no other choice but to agree to the proposal and put his mother in a specialized clinic. It was a hard decision for Charles. In fact, it turned out to be very good. Emily was placed in a nice, spacious room alone. The conditions there were more than comfortable. The medical staff was present by her side. All day and night, she could socialize with other patients, take walks, watch TV. Charles came to visit her, bringing her anything she asked for. Her mother could not assess whether she liked it there or not.
But it was clear from her condition that she was better off surrounded by people and well cared for than at home with a nurse. It was a very expensive private hospital, and each patient was treated in a special way. Charles persuaded Camille to return to her parents' home. They lived there for a couple months and decided that the house was too big for them, even for their large family. Most of the rooms were unused. Charles decided to sell it and buy a smaller house. He disbanded the security, the cook, the gardeners, the driver. They didn't need the help of other people.
Charles asked the woman who was dyeing in the house to come over once a week and do a general cleaning while they were all out for a walk. The new house was nearly half the size. Charles had never learned from the fact that his parents were very wealthy, and now he didn't need all that luxury. His father, who grew up in the countryside, didn't need to either. But Mom really wanted to live beautifully. Now, of course, she no longer cared where to live, in the old huge house or with her daughter-in-law in their new one. Charles took over the management of the firm completely. A year after his father's death, he had enough to understand all the issues and nuances. The boys were growing up, already running well and beginning to talk. They resembled their father, like two drops of water. Only those closest to them could tell them apart. To the rest of us, they were exactly the same. Charles did not ask his mother about the results of the test at the maternity hospital. He was sure of his wife and that they were his children. Now, looking at them, it would never occur to anyone to question that. Camille was anxious to get back to work. She was terribly tired of the endless diapers, potty training, round-the-clock laundry, and cooking. She needed a distraction. She and Charles found a good private kindergarten that accepted children from the age of 1.5. Camille made inquiries. It had a good reputation. They took the twins there. 2 weeks later, Camille returned to work. She was very welcome and happy to be back. Camille began to take care of herself, joined a gym, and went to a beautician. During her pregnancy, her hair had suffered a lot. No masks and balms did not help. Then, Camille went to an extreme step. She grew her hair, and they began to look as before, thicker and beautiful. She completely changed her closet, bought bold things that she had never paid attention to before. After the birth of her children, she became more confident. Charles certainly liked these changes. He enjoyed coming home to his young and beautiful wife. Once again, Charles came to visit his mother. The doctor complained that she had been refusing to eat lately and was always talking about some kind of test. And if she doesn't start taking food, she will have to be fed through a tube. Of course, Charles had no influence over his mother, and he was informed of that. For information, what test is Mom talking about? He immediately realized when he went into her room. He tried to talk to her as before, but it was hopeless. Mom, hello. It's me, Charles, your son. Do you recognize me? Yes, Charles, I'm so glad. You've grown up a lot. How's school going? You've corrected your grades? Huh. Mommy, it's okay. I fixed it. Good. I don't want to go to the assembly. Let Daddy go, okay? Yeah, okay. Whatever you say, Mommy. You know that test. It says, these are your kids. Take them. They're yours. Yeah, I know, Mom. You're not listening to me. Take the babies. I took that test. You're the father. The test showed you're the father. Emily kept going on and on about the test. In her head, her past, present, and future were all jumbled up. Mom, you have to eat. Otherwise, you'll be force-fed. I'm eating, don't worry. You go now. You're late for school, and I have to go. It was very hard for Charles to look at his mother. She was completely unaware of reality. He left the room, wiping his tears. She remembered the protest because it was important to her. But now she wouldn't know that Camille hadn't really cheated. It didn't matter anymore. The next morning, Charles received a call from the pre-al clinic informing him that his mother had passed away from a heart attack. Emily was buried next to her husband Mason. Charles stepped in to take over the inheritance, but the clinics were on the Firin Bakkartgerslordine Talida Bradier Bar Ach Verkur Achiro at Heftenoa Bill at Pfeiffer versus bankruptcy, and there was no one to run them. He suggested Camille take over. She had something to do with medicine, even if it wasn't direct. But her mom didn't have that kind of education either. But she could run the business, and the clinic brought in a steady income. Camille was afraid to take on such responsibility, but she didn't want to lose such a big business. She quit her job at the veterinary clinic and began learning the ins and outs of running a dental center. The children went to daycare. Camille had plenty of time, and she delved very deeply into the business. In 3 months, she was able to open a frozen branch, and it began to work steadily. And after another 3 months, it started generating income. Camille worked day and night to make sure everything was right. She began to like the job, even though she missed being a veterinarian. In the morning, Camille took the children to daycare and drove to the clinic. She had important negotiations waiting for her regarding the delivery of new equipment. She was preparing for the meeting and was very nervous. The night before, she had had disturbing dreams, and she didn't understand what they were about. As best she could, she tried to calm down and not to get herself worked up, but her premonition did not fail her. Just before the meeting, Camille received a call from the kindergarten and was told the terrible news that the cleaner had left the window open from the evening and had not fixed it. The teachers did not pay attention to it, and at some point one of the twins climbed on the windowsill and leaned out of the window. The child did not hold on and flew down. Fortunately, it was only the second floor, and the baby survived. The ambulance took him to the hospital. When Camille arrived, the boy was in intensive care. He had a fractured spine, soft tissue contusions, and a brain injury. She had to wait until the surgery was over. Then they let her come in and see her son. He was lying under the machines, unconscious. So small and defenseless. Camille began to sob at what she saw. The doctor came up to her, asked her to leave the intensive care unit, and began to tell her what condition the boy was in. The second floor turned out to be quite high, and the little boy was flying upside down. His spine has been fractured to the point where he will probably never get back on his feet again. His condition at the moment is assessed as stably serious. How much damage to his brain is still difficult to assess. Camille listened to the doctor and then lost consciousness. She woke up already lying on the couch with vodka in her nose, moistened with ammonia. She tried to pass out a couple more times from the realization of what had happened, but the ammonia kept her from passing out. She was shaking so badly that she tried to call her husband but couldn't get to the phone. A nurse helped her dial the number. Camille was unable to speak, only sobbing. When Charles picked up the phone, he heard a high-pitched wail. "Camille? Camille? Can you hear me? Say something." A nurse picked up the phone and explained that his son was in the hospital and where to go. Charles dropped everything and ran into the parking lot. His deputy ran out after him and stopped him from driving himself. In this state, he drove him to the right address, picked up the car, and drove away. Camille was sitting outside the emergency room, crying bitterly. Charles saw her, came over and hugged her. She was choking on her tears and told him what had happened at the kindergarten. The doctor asked them to go home. If there was any change in the child's condition, he would let them know immediately. Camille was very afraid of losing her son and did not want to leave. But Charles reminded her, that there was one more child left in the kindergarten, and they had to pick him up. When they arrived at the kindergarten, the police were still there. They were interviewing the director, teachers, nannies, and cleaners. Charles reported that they were the parents of their child, and also gave a statement. Camille was unable to speak. At the hospital, she was sedated, given a shot, and fell asleep in the car. They picked up their son and drove home. The director of the kindergarten was prosecuted under the article, Provision of Services that Do Not Meet Life and Health Safety Requirements. The kindergarten itself was closed. While the investigation was underway, the baby was in hospital. His condition was stable. He came to himself, but almost constantly slept, because he was under the situation. His parents came to see him every day. Camille would drive to the clinic in the morning, and from there to the hospital. The second child was with a babysitter during this time. On several occasions, Charles and Camille were called to testify.
Camille could not hide her anger, started crying, and demanded that all those involved be punished for making her child disabled for life. On leaving the station, Camille fainted again. Charles took her to the family doctor. They both thought it was stress, both the first and second time. The doctor examined Camille and took tests. The results were back in 15 minutes. Camille, I don't know how you will take this news. I really hope it will be as happy for you as it can be in this situation. Camille, you're pregnant. I don't know what to say, doctor. Camille started crying again. Don't say anything. I'd like to suggest that you have a checkup first, and then you can decide what you want to do. All right, let's have a checkup. I don't understand why this has come at such a bad time. I dare say, although as a doctor should not say so to my patients, but the appearance of a child is always the providence of God. And it's not up to us to decide when it's the right time and when it's not. Yes, you're right, absolutely. Thank you, doctor. I'm going to give you a rundown of what needs to be done and when. We'll talk to you again as soon as it's done. I will. Yes, doctor. Good. Good. This was completely unexpected news for Camille. They'd been unprotected for a long time, but they didn't hiss one. At such a difficult time in her life. She wanted to rejoice, but she couldn't. As sad as it taken up too much space in her heart. She kept thinking what kind of life awaited her, the poor baby. Camille underwent all the tests and went to the doctor's office for an appointment. He met her with a smile and asked how her son was feeling. According to the results of the examination, Camille had a perfectly healthy fetus, corresponding to the 6th week of pregnancy. All the tests were normal. She had every chance to carry and give birth to a healthy baby. Of course, all doctors are always in favor of a woman giving birth. But in Camille's situation, the doctor did not insist, did not persuade. He gave her the opportunity to make her own decision together with her husband. At home, he and Charles discussed at length whether Camille could physically bear it all. The trauma of a baby on a spill-out clinic and pregnancy. Will she have the strength to do it all? Of course Charles will help, but she would have to carry and deliver the baby herself. 2 days later, Camille went to the doctor again. She made a decision that despite all the hardships her family had endured, she would not kill her child. She would find the strength to bear it and give birth to it. The doctor was absolutely right. This is God's plan. To find out she was pregnant now. The baby was slowly recovering. He began to speak and move his arms and legs, began to eat on his own. The situation was reversed. He slept on his own without medication. He was still given painkiller injections and systems. He was tolerant, hardly cried or became cranky. Camille came to see him every day, taking his little brother with her. Twins. He and his brother
had such a keen sense of each other. If one was hurting, the other would start hurting. One would cry in the hospital, the other would start crying at home at the same time. There had always been a remarkable similarity between them. But now that one of them wouldn't be able to walk on his own, they wouldn't be so similar anymore. The little boy was discharged from the hospital. A very long and hard rehabilitation was waiting for him. But the boy was very strong, a little fighter. He worked with specialists in centers, and then at home with his parents. He had one chance in 100 that he would be able to stand on his feet. Albeit on crutches, but not in a wheelchair. Camille hired the best rehab, the best massage therapists. Together, they did a tremendous job every day. Camille's pregnancy was surprisingly very easy and uneventful. No toxicosis, no threat of termination. None of the things she had gone through with the twins. Camille was going for an ultrasound. They could tell her the sex of the baby. Charles came up and said that he had dreamed about his mom the night before, and she said it was a girl. He stayed home with the twins. Camille went to the clinic. Charles didn't actually tell Camille everything. In his dreams, his mom tells him every time that they are his children. And he dreams about her quite often. Perhaps it was just a figment of his imagination, because he never believed in the supernatural. But he couldn't explain to himself why he was dreaming about her either. At the ultrasound, the doctor told Camille that they were expecting a girl. The twins grew very quickly, even though one of them couldn't walk yet. They always found something to do and something to play. Camille could not dare to put her healthy son in daycare. Fear sat very firmly in her mind. They stayed at home with a nanny. She fed them and took them out for walks, play, and developmental activities. Camille worked at her mother-in-law's clinic until her maternity, with little or no distraction during labor. She supervised everything. Even from the birth center, she was admitted early. The first labor was operative. Not much time passed. It was necessary to observe. The girl was born relatively quickly. Camille? Making her on her own, naturally. Healthy and big baby girl looks just like her mommy. Then she would have the same long blonde hair as Camille. She slept well at night, giving her mother a chance to rest, remembering the first few months of the twins' lives. Camille felt the huge difference and thanked the doctor who had said such the right words to her in such a timely manner. After the birth of their daughter, the mother stopped dreaming about Charles. It was a big, tight-knit family, a family that had been through a lot of hardships, but they always supported each other, managed to keep love and respect, and will continue to carry these feelings through life.